You're listening to the Reds Podcast.
This is episode number 112. Comic Rik Roberts is back in the studio with me. We're talking about how you can better connect with an audience. It doesn't matter if you're a writer, podcaster, blogger, or speaker. This episode will help you. That's coming up.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money, work less, and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
Rik Roberts back in the co-hosting chair. He is the principal of the School of Laughs. Is at schooloflaughs.com. Some great advice from a comic perspective. It's going to work with you if you're a writer, podcaster, blogger, or speaker. It's a good podcast, Rik.
Hey, we're getting there. We're getting our feet underneath us, and I'm really excited about this new year. We've done a half year's episode so far, and we've really picked up some steam and starting to find our voice. You know, I've heard it takes 60 to 100 podcasts to kind of get it going. I think we're getting there.
When you started out as a comic, you were how old?
It was 1992, so I would have been 22 or so.
So 22 years old. Now we're talking 20 years.
46.
Yeah,
46.
20 years later, your life has changed. You got a couple kids. You're married. You can't probably joke around about the same things that you were joking around about at 22.
If you do, it doesn't come off as honest or authentic.
It comes across a little weird.
Yeah, I mean,
It's like that old guy macking on a little girl.
Yeah, it's like you shouldn't even be aware of these terms or what have you. It's funny that the great thing about comedy is every year of your life gives you more material. You need to stay in tune with that and really talk about. For me, I talk about things that I'm going through right now, and I try to identify with an audience that's 15 years on either side. I'm not going to try to reach the college-age kids anymore. I'm not really interested in doing the old folks home circuit just quite yet. But the people that have been through, So I'm trying to hit people within a radius that makes sense for me, so the topics are relevant.
When it comes to podcasting or books or blogs, more or less we're all talking about the same thing. Let's say you're talking about success, or how to make money, or how to lose weight. Perspective is really all you've got. That's the only differentiator that you've got.
In all those different situations you just mentioned, somebody that's been through it and they've succeeded and persevered on the other side of something that I'm just now going through, that's the person I want to listen to, not somebody that's speculating on what could happen if they go through it. And I think comics are the same way. When you have that authentic voice and you've done something and you talk about it on stage, it resonates a lot better.
Comedy has really changed over the years. It seems to me a lot of what's really hot is this observational comedy. And I think that is what makes people stand out with, again, podcast writing. And you hit on it too. The older you get, that's actually an advantage. I was joking around here on the podcast a couple months ago. I saw a comic at Zany's, a club in Nashville. So old, they basically wheeled a corpse out on stage.
Right.
But man, once that guy settled in, and I think that the stand he was on, he was leaning on it pretty hard.
Right.
But he had the stories and he had the presence, and it was amazing. It was certainly better than any younger guy could have done because of that.
Right, and I'm assuming he really delivered his perspective, and his audience probably was in that same general age group to where they identified with him, right?
Oh yeah, they were God's waiting room, as you say.
Yeah, heaven's launching pad. That's what I call Florida.
I was waiting for like the defibrillator to come out and pump somebody up before the show was over.
It adds a little excitement to the show if you don't know the guy's going to finish it or not.
Strangely enough, you mentioned that. We talked about it on the podcast a couple weeks ago. Zig Ziglar, I don't know if you know Zig.
Oh, yeah.
Famous motivational speaker. He made the comment one time, because he was speaking to these rooms of like 8,000 people. They said, what would you do if somebody had a heart attack? He said, the show would go on. I'm not able to help that guy. People need to get in and get that guy out, and having people just wondering what's going on actually distracts from that. So do you have stories, speaking of stories, about things that have happened to you while you're on stage?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple that come to mind. That kind of rang a bell because I was on stage in South Bend, Indiana. I believe I was the middle act at that time. So the MC had warmed up the crowd, and there was a big guy front and center, maybe 3 chairs back from the stage, and he was talking the whole time and trying to take the focus away from the comic.
Like a heckler.
Yeah, pretty much. But he was trying to be the life of the party. Like he thought he was really adding something to the show. And so I get up there halfway into my set, he's settled down. He's respecting me on stage. But at one point, he's like, I'm going to buy a round for this whole table. And he stands up, loses balance, falls on a lady one chair in front of him, and breaks her arm. Oh, an audible snap. The whole crowd heard it, and the lady went into shock immediately. And he's like, oh, no, this ain't good. And so I'm on stage. I'm like, okay, it looks like we've got a situation here. I'm not a paramedic. It looks like she's in shock. Would somebody mind coming up here that maybe is in the paramedic field and maybe take her, if we need to immobilize her or get her going, whatever. Luckily, we were right next to, the fire department, and they got her in 6 minutes. But I was kind of just like, okay, I've got a few more jokes. I'm not making fun of her or the situation, but at least this guy stopped talking long enough for me to get the rest of my act out. And so as the paramedics came in, I kind of just walked to the other side of the stage from where they were to direct attention away from what they were doing. And, of course, some people were still watching the person being treated. But as soon as I got up and left, I moved right back to the center stage and made it all about the comedy show. So that was one where I didn't know if that was the right way to do it. It was on the fly, didn't know what to do. But it was one of those, I'm glad it doesn't happen all the time.
Ugh.
I heard it. I cringed. I almost threw up just a little bit in my mouth here and there.
It's scary when that happens because you don't know what you're going to do. You can plan for it, but until it happens, you don't know what you're going to do. But I've seen amazing things like that happen. Paul Stanley from KISS.
Yeah.
Paul Stanley did a club tour, and I saw a video of him. I was doing some research. I was supposed to be interviewing Gene Simmons, actually. So I was having to prepare because, Gene Simmons isn't going to give you a whole lot of time. No. He's like a comic. He's 7 minutes in and out of there. So I watched this club show, this video, because you get on YouTube and you just get lost. The crowd starts getting closer and closer and closer to the stage. Paul Stanley stops the show, and it was amazing. He goes, all right, everybody, we got some people getting really crammed up here, so I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. You're all going to take 2 steps back. And it was incredible. Just totally had the control. The crowd followed him because it's easy to lose a crowd. You, of all people, would know because you've seen comics just die on stage. It's just you. There's nothing to hide behind. You got that skinny bar of the mic stand,
It can be tough. Losing the crowd is an interesting phenomenon. Typically now if it happens, if I'm in a situation, it's, I don't blame anything, but sometimes the audio, the lighting, the proximity for a comic, proximity is everything. Like if somebody said, you can take away 2 of these things but leave 1, proximity, lights, or sound. You can take the lights and sound. I still want to be close to the first person in the first row. And, in my little contracts I send out, I make sure that there's no huge dance floor separating us.
Right.
Because timing, right. I need it has to come back from the audience to me, and that's key.
Well, speakers know this. The bigger the audience, if you're going to hit a joke, there's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah.
And I haven't really quite figured out how that is because sound travels like 800 miles an hour, right?
Right.
It's going really, really quickly. But it is weird about that. The closer you can be to an audience, the more interactive and personal it seems.
Yeah, intimacy is everything. Comedy at its best is revealing your soul. It doesn't be that extreme, but you're really giving your personal takes on everything. So you want that personal connection. Some comics are different. They could just stare at the back of the wall and deliver their jokes in rote memory. But I'm the kind of guy that wants to be part of the crowd.
Do you have advice for, let's say, a podcast or somebody who's doing something without a crowd to connect in that personal way? Or is there anything you can do that will do that without somebody actually being there in front of you?
Yeah, one thing I do before we get on and do our podcast each time, I pull up instant messages that people have sent me, from listening to the podcast, and I look at their profiles, if it's a Facebook thing or a Twitter thing, and I really just visualize those people listening. And I didn't do that the first few episodes because we didn't have people sending stuff in yet. But now I kind of get a feel for who is listening to our podcast, and I really just picture them of something I'm getting ready to do. I'm going to get a wireless printer finally and get into this whatever generation that I'm not supposed to be part of.
21st century.
Yeah. And every time I get an instant message or something from somebody thanking me for an episode or whatever, and it's kind of amazing how many we get because we're really talking about what people need to hear.
Right.
I'm going to print those things out, and one wall in my office is just going to be messages from all the people that are listening.
I like that. I like that.
So that's going to help me realize it's important every single time on the mic.
Well, it helps keep you connected to an audience. We talked about it the last time you were here. You were on episode number 109, redpodcast.com/109 if you want to hear Rik on another episode talking about what people can learn from a comic perspective. But that's keeping in touch with the audience. it's really, really easy to lose that. I remember hearing an interview with Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. Uh-huh. Twisted Sister was like a rough WWE version of the New York Dolls. They would beat people up, and they're in drag, and it was crazy. But he talked about writing, I guess, a second or third album once the thing had really, really hit. He said, I'm at my pool. It's heated. I've got maid service. I'm a millionaire.
Right.
How do I keep in touch with this rough audience? And it can be tough.
Yeah, and here's one thing for podcasters, and we've found a few tricks that kind of work for us to actually know who those people are that are out there. You can ask for iTunes reviews and these kinds of things. Every third or fourth episode that we put out, we have a tip sheet that they can request, and they can only get it if they sign into our newsletter list. So we'll say, hey, if you want to join our newsletter list and get this tip sheet, send it to this email address, put this in the subject heading. And we start to not only develop a database outside of iTunes or whatever, because you really need the email addresses of your listeners if you want to connect with them outside of stuff. But we start to get a feel for who they are. And also, once we've made that connection, they feel much easier to ask us questions and suggest podcast episode topics. And, I've even had people suggest different classes and courses to teach based on what they needed. So had I not had that initial way to connect with them, I would have never had that.
Do you have any thoughts on approachability? Because coming from the entertainment business myself, I think that's a huge thing to success. You want to be, I think you've said it before, like one level above your audience, dress one level above. And
Sure.
You are going to be on a platform, but you also want to remain approachable.
Right.
Especially if you're selling merch out of the back of the room.
Sure.
You don't want somebody scared of you where they're not going to want to talk to you.
I think, and it's just kind of my personality, but I think it works well with podcasting, with any kind of engagement like that, is to find the point of connection with your listener on their particular level. All of us who have podcasts or whatever, we're going to have a wide range. I hear people say about define your avatar. Well, you have more than one avatar. I don't care who you are and what you're doing out there. You have everything from young people that have never gone into business maybe listening. You've got the experienced pro looking for an edge. So you have multiple avatars out there. So you need to find ways to connect not only with one, but with all those different ones that are listening. And you don't want to have a million, but think of 4 or 5 of your prime listeners. Who are they? What are they into? And connect on that level.
You talked about having, we'll call it feedback, audience feedback in your office. Mm-hmm. I've heard of podcasters and radio hosts, this is where I first started, taking a picture of somebody and actually talking to them. Do you have any advice for people doing a solo show or doing a speaking engagement, let's say, instead of a panel? How do you handle one-on-one connection?
Sure. If they're not there and you want to create the feeling of it?
Well, or just, let's go with that.
Okay, we can start with that and then go through another example. But yeah, if you're solo on the mic, which I think is probably the hardest way to podcast, you really do have to visualize. I would definitely put up some pictures, or if you have a Facebook outlet where you're releasing your podcast and letting people know about it, pull up some of those people that are connected to that. You definitely want to visualize somebody, and you want to also hear the words you're saying as you say them. And I should have been doing that this whole podcast. I'm thinking about it now. But if you're not giving the audience time to process what you're saying, you're not giving them a chance to participate in the conversation. Even though they're not on the phone or in the studio with you, everybody listening is actually participating. Everybody listening to this right now is like, I hope they have one golden nugget I could take away from this. So if you don't give them the chance to process your golden nuggets or whatever you're saying, you're really kind of tuning them out.
I think that's great, especially for comic, but also for me as a broadcaster. The intros and the outros that I've got down, and I can run through them without even thinking about it. If you're doing the same set night after night, or sometimes 2 or 3 shows a night,
right?
It's easy, I would imagine, to not even take a breath.
Yeah, you can definitely, comics, and I'm sure speakers do this too, and anybody that's in front of a mic or a crowd, you can get on autopilot if you're not careful. And as soon as I feel that kicking in, I automatically take a breath, step back, and regroup, because I can feel it becoming almost cheesy in my mind that here I am, joke guy, instead of guy on stage connecting. So anybody can tell a joke, but to tell a joke and connect with the crowd, that's what makes you a professional.
Well, connecting with the crowd, sometimes known as crowd work. Mm-hmm. So talk about crowd work and the lessons that you can learn from that, because that seems like a great way to connect with people at a live event, but it's also very scary, I would imagine, because you've got that big drunk guy there, and you don't want to call on him because who knows what he's going to say.
Right. here's one thing that I've learned over the years, and I've never really, I don't even think, passed this on to anybody, but it's never ask a question that I don't already know the answer to.
Well, I say that actually to my radio